The spaceport was loud and chaotic, filled with aliens of all shapes and sizes. Daniel Carter, a human trader, walked through the crowded marketplace, searching for a rare mineral shipment. He had been traveling through different planets, but this one, Vicaris, was just another stop for business. As he passed a row of merchants, he felt something strange. Someone was watching him. Daniel turned his head and saw a figure standing in the shadows between two stalls. A tall, slender alien woman with shimmering silver eyes and deep blue markings on her skin. She stepped forward, her gaze locked onto him. Then, in a soft but firm voice, she said, "Do you remember me, my old friend, human?" Daniel froze. He had no idea who she was. He studied her face, searching his memory. She looked familiar, but from where? His travels had taken him to many places, but he couldn't recall ever meeting her. "I think you've got the wrong person," Daniel said carefully. The alien girl smiled, but there was sadness in her eyes. "No, it's you. I know it." Before Daniel could ask more, a loud alarm blared across the marketplace. "Attention! The fugitive has been spotted," a robotic voice echoed through the port. Daniel turned to see several armored enforcers scanning the crowd. They were looking for someone. The alien girl grabbed his wrist. "If you trust me, follow me. If you don't, we'll both die." Daniel hesitated for a second. He didn't know her. He didn't understand what was happening, but something deep inside him told him he had to go with her. The enforcers were moving closer, their scanners sweeping the area. Daniel made his choice. "Go. Lead the way." The alien girl pulled him into a narrow alley, moving quickly through the maze of buildings. The sounds of the search filled the air behind them. "Who are you?" Daniel whispered as they ran. She didn't answer. Instead, she pushed open a hidden doorway and pulled him inside. The door slid shut, leaving them in darkness. For a moment, they stood there, breathing heavily. Then she finally spoke. "My name is Neliara, and whether you remember me or not, we have unfinished business." Daniel still didn't understand, but one thing was clear. This was only the beginning. Daniel's heart was still racing as he stood in the dark room. The only light came from a small blue panel on the wall. The alien girl, Neliara, was watching him closely, her silver eyes glowing faintly. He took a deep breath. "All right, start talking. Who are you, and why do you think I know you?" Neliara hesitated. She looked at him as if searching for something. Then she said, "We met a long time ago, Daniel. When we were children." Daniel frowned. Children? That didn't make sense. He had spent his childhood traveling with his father, a diplomat who worked on different planets. He had met many alien species, but he couldn't remember a girl like her. "I don't remember that," he admitted. Neliara's expression darkened. "I thought you might not." She crossed her arms, frustrated. "But I remember everything. You were my best friend. You saved me once. You made a promise." Daniel shook his head. "What promise?" Before she could answer, a warning light blinked on the wall panel. A robotic voice announced, "Search teams are approaching." Neliara cursed in her language and turned to Daniel. "We have to leave. Now." Without waiting for his response, she opened a hatch in the floor. A small tunnel led downward. "Come on." Daniel hesitated for only a second. Then, hearing heavy footsteps outside, he followed her down. Into the underground. The tunnel was narrow and dark. They crawled for a few minutes before emerging into a hidden chamber. A small ship was docked inside. Neliara quickly powered it up. Daniel climbed into the co-pilot's seat, still confused but curious. "So, you expect me to believe we were childhood friends?" he asked as she activated the controls. Neliara gave him a sideways glance. "Yes, and I need you to remember, Daniel. It's important." The ship's engine hummed. The hangar doors above started opening. Daniel ran a hand through his hair. He wanted to believe her, but no memories came. Before he could respond, the ship's sensors flashed red. We've got a problem," he said. A fleet of enemy ships was waiting above the port. Neliara's hands tightened on the controls. "They're not here for me anymore," she whispered. Daniel's stomach dropped. "Then, who are they after?" She looked at him. "You." The ship blasted into the sky, and the chase began. The small ship shot out of the underground hangar, engines roaring as it climbed into the sky. Daniel gripped the seat as alarms blared around him. "Hold on," Neliara shouted, flipping switches rapidly. The ship spun to the left, dodging a blast of energy from the enemy fleet waiting above. Daniel's eyes widened as he saw 5 enemy ships in pursuit. Who were these people? Why were they after him? "I thought you were the fugitive," he said, tightening his harness. "I was," Neliara replied, her hand steady on the controls. "But now they know who you are." Daniel frowned. "Who am I?" Neliara's eyes flicked to him for a second. "Someone important." Before he could ask more, the ship shook violently. A missile barely missed them, exploding behind them in a burst of blue flames. "They won't let us go easily," Neliara muttered. Daniel glanced at the controls. He wasn't just a traitor, he was a skilled pilot. He had flown ships before, though not in combat. His instincts kicked in. "Let me fly," he said. Neliara hesitated. "Are you sure?" He nodded. "Trust me." She slid out of the pilot's seat, and Daniel took control. The ship responded to his touch like it knew him. He pulled up sharply, dodging another blast. The enemy ships followed, but he was already calculating his next move. There, he pointed at a dense asteroid field ahead. Neliara's eyes widened. "That's suicide." Daniel smirked. "Only if you're slow." Into the asteroid field. The ship dived into the asteroid field, weaving through the massive floating rocks. The enemy ships followed, but they weren't as fast or agile. Daniel twisted the controls, making sharp turns between the asteroids. One of the enemy ships smashed into a rock and exploded. "Nice flying," Neliara admitted, gripping the seat tightly. Daniel didn't reply. He was focused. Another enemy ship got too close, trying to lock on. "Not today," he muttered, flipping the ship upside down and squeezing through a tight gap. The enemy ship tried to follow, but clipped its wing on an asteroid and spun out of control. Now only 3 were left. Daniel saw their exit. "Hold on." He pushed the engines to full power. They burst out of the asteroid field, leaving the remaining ships behind. But as soon as they were in open space, a huge battleship loomed ahead. Neliara gasped. "No, that's the Zereth Dominion." Daniel swallowed. He didn't know the name, but something about that ship felt familiar. The screen flashed with an incoming message. A deep voice spoke. "Daniel Carter, we have been waiting for you." Neliara turned to him. "I told you, you're important." Daniel had no idea why, but he was about to find out. Daniel stared at the massive Zereth Dominion battleship floating in front of them. It was enormous, its dark metal surface covered in glowing red lights. The message repeated, "Daniel Carter, we have been waiting for you." His heart pounded. Who were these people? How did they know his name? Neliara's grip tightened on the armrest. "We need to run," she whispered. But before Daniel could react, the ship's controls locked up. The entire system shut down. "We're caught in a tractor beam," Neliara said, her voice tense. "They're pulling us in." Daniel tried to override the system, but nothing worked. They were helpless as the ship was dragged toward the battleship's hangar. "We're not getting out of this one, are we?" he muttered. Neliara looked at him, her silver eyes filled with worry. "Not unless you start remembering." Captured by the Zereth Dominion, the ship landed inside the hangar with a soft thud. Armed Zereth soldiers surrounded them immediately, their dark armor reflecting the bright lights. The door opened, and a tall figure in a high-ranking uniform stepped forward. His face was hidden behind a dark visor. "Take them," he ordered. Daniel and Neliara were forced out of the ship. Soldiers grabbed their arms, but they didn't hurt them. Instead, they guided them down a long metal corridor. As they walked, Daniel felt strange. His head ached, and flashes of images flickered in his mind. A planet, a hidden chamber, a promise. Something was buried deep in his memory. Finally, they were brought into a large, empty room. The tall officer removed his helmet, revealing a scarred alien face with piercing yellow eyes. He stepped closer to Daniel and studied him carefully. Then he spoke. "You don't remember, do you?" Daniel clenched his fists. "Remember what?" The officer sighed. "Your father erased your memories, but you were part of something bigger." Daniel blinked. "My father." He had always known his father was a diplomat, but nothing seemed unusual about his past. Now, doubt filled his mind. The officer continued, "You and the girl, Neliara, were chosen for an ancient agreement, a treaty meant to unite two powerful civilizations." Daniel turned to Neliara, confused. "Is this true?" She nodded slowly. "Yes. But before it could happen, everything went wrong. Your father took you away, and your memories were wiped." Daniel's chest tightened. He wanted to deny it, but deep inside, something felt true. The officer stared at him. "You are the key, Daniel Carter. The last hope to restore what was lost." Daniel's mind was spinning. If this was true, then his entire life had been a lie. And now, the truth was finally coming back. Daniel's hands clenched into fists. His heart pounded in his chest. Everything he knew about his past, his father, his childhood, was being questioned. He looked at Neliara. Her silver eyes held sadness, but also hope. She wasn't lying. The Zareth officer stepped closer. "You don't remember, but your father was part of an agreement between humans and Neliara's people. A secret treaty." Daniel frowned. "What kind of treaty?" The officer's yellow eyes gleamed. "An alliance, one that could have changed the galaxy." He paused. "And you, Daniel, were at the center of it." Daniel shook his head. "That makes no sense. I was just a kid." "You weren't just a kid," the officer said. "You were given something. An artifact. A key that only you could use." Neliara took a deep breath. "That's why we came here, Daniel. You have to remember where it is." Daniel's mind felt heavy. An artifact. A key. It sounded impossible. Then suddenly, pain shot through his head. A memory returns. Images flashed before his eyes. A dark room. A hidden vault. A small glowing object in his hands. A promise. "I will keep it safe," his younger voice echoed in his mind. Daniel gasped and staggered backward. The memory felt real. He looked at Neliara. I think I know where it is." Her eyes widened. "Where?" Daniel took a shaky breath. "A planet. Kairos 9. My father took me there once. I remember hiding something." The Zareth officer's face remained unreadable. "Then that is where you must go." Daniel frowned. "And why should I trust you?" The officer sighed. "Because the ones who erased your past will come for you soon. And when they do, you will wish you had remembered sooner." Escape plan. Daniel exchanged a glance with Neliara. He didn't trust the Zareth Dominion, but he had no choice. Neliara whispered, "We have to get out of here." Daniel nodded. He turned to the officer. "Let us go. I'll find the artifact." The officer studied him for a long moment. Then, surprisingly, he stepped aside. "Very well," he said, "but be warned, others are looking for the artifact too. And they will not be as forgiving as us." Without wasting time, Daniel and Neliara were escorted back to their ship. As soon as they were inside, Neliara launched the engines. The ship blasted out of the hangar, escaping into the stars. Daniel gripped the controls, his mind racing. A hidden artifact. A lost memory. A secret that could change everything. He turned to Neliara. "We're going to Kairos 9. She nodded. "Then let's hope we're not too late." The ship shot into hyperspace, toward the truth Daniel had forgotten. The ship soared through hyperspace, the blue tunnel of light stretching endlessly before them. Daniel sat in the cockpit, gripping the controls. His mind was racing. He had memories of Kairos 9, a barren world with ancient ruins. He could see flashes of a hidden vault, the artifact, and his younger self making a promise. But the details were still blurry. Neliara sat beside him, watching him carefully. "Do you think the Zereth let us go that easily?" Daniel exhaled. "No, I think they're waiting for something." As if on cue, the ship's alarms blared. Incoming ships. 5 vessels detected. Neliara's face darkened. "It's them." Daniel's heart pounded. "Bounty hunters." "No," she said grimly. "Worse." The ship lurched violently as something hit their shields. The blue light of hyperspace shattered as they were pulled back into real space. Ahead of them, 5 sleek black ships hovered like predatory beasts. Their markings were unfamiliar. Not Zereth, not any faction Daniel knew. A voice crackled through the ship's comms. "Daniel Carter, surrender now. You are carrying something that does not belong to you." Daniel's stomach twisted. They wanted the artifact, but he didn't even have it yet. "What do we do?" he asked Neliara. She didn't hesitate. "We fight." Dogfight in the void. Neliara jumped into the co-pilot's seat, flipping switches, weapons online, shields at 50%. Daniel's grip tightened. "Hold on." He slammed the controls forward, sending the ship into a sudden roll. The enemy ships reacted instantly, firing blue plasma bolts that barely missed. Daniel banked hard, twisting the ship through the asteroid field that had appeared nearby. The enemy ships followed, their cannons glowing. "Come on, let's see what you've got," Daniel muttered. A missile locked onto them. Neliara's fingers flew over the controls, deploying countermeasures. A burst of electromagnetic flares shot out, confusing the missile, which veered off and exploded. One of the enemy ships got too close. Daniel saw an opening. He flipped the ship upside down, letting their pursuer fly right past them, then fired. A direct hit, the enemy ship exploded. A narrow escape. The remaining 4 enemy ships surrounded them. "We're outnumbered," Neliara warned. Daniel's eyes darted across the console. There had to be a way out. Then he spotted something on the scanner, a gravity well just beyond the asteroids. An idea formed. "Brace yourself." He pushed the ship forward at full speed, heading straight for the gravity well. Neliara's eyes widened. "Are you insane? That thing will crush us." "Not if we time it right," Daniel said, focusing. The enemy ships followed, closing in for the kill. At the last second, Daniel cut the ship's engines, letting gravity pull them in. The enemy ships weren't as fast, and they got caught in the pull. 2 of them crashed into each other, exploding in flames. The other 2 struggled, but by then, Daniel had already angled their ship away from danger and punched the hyperdrive. The stars stretched into hyperspace. They had escaped. Kairos 9 awaits. Neliara let out a breath. That was reckless. Daniel grinned. "Yeah, but it worked." She shook her head, but there was admiration in her eyes. "We need to get to Kairos 9 fast. If they were after us, others will be too." Daniel nodded. "Then let's find that artifact before they do." As the ship raced through hyperspace, the truth was waiting for them on Kairos 9. The ship dropped out of hyperspace and Kairos 9 came into view, a desolate planet covered in endless rocky plains and deep canyons. Its surface was illuminated by a dying red sun. Daniel gripped the controls as the ship descended into the planet's atmosphere. Strong winds battered against the hull, making the flight unstable. "This place looks abandoned," Neliara murmured, scanning the surface. Daniel nodded. "It was. But I remember now. My father brought me here once. He told me to hide something." Neliara looked at him. "Then let's find it before anyone else does." The hidden vault. They landed near a massive canyon, Daniel stepped onto the dry, cracked ground, taking in the eerie silence. His head pulsed with faint memories. A cave, a hidden entrance, something buried deep inside. "This way," he said, leading Neliara toward a cluster of jagged rocks. After minutes of searching, they found it, a narrow crevice in the canyon wall. Daniel placed his hand on the cold stone. It felt familiar. Then, as if responding to his touch, the rock rumbled and shifted, revealing the hidden passage. Neliara's eyes widened. "It was waiting for you." They stepped inside. The passage led downward, deeper into the planet. The walls were lined with ancient symbols, glowing faintly. After what felt like an eternity, they reached a massive vault door covered in dust. At its center was a handprint scanner. Daniel hesitated. Then, slowly, he placed his hand on it. For a moment, nothing happened. Then, the entire vault trembled. The door slowly began to open. The artifact of power. Inside, the chamber was filled with advanced technology long forgotten. In the center, on a stone pedestal, was the artifact. It was small, metallic, and glowing with golden energy. The moment Daniel saw it, his memories became clearer. As a child, he had been told to protect this artifact at all costs. His father had said it was powerful, something that both sides would kill for. Neliara stepped forward, her voice almost a whisper. "That's it. The key to the Lost Fleet." Daniel's fingers hovered over it. "The Lost Fleet." She nodded. "A fleet built by my ancestors. It was hidden long ago, waiting for the one who could awaken it." Daniel's heart pounded. That person was him. The awakening. Before he could grab it, the ground suddenly shook. A loud explosion echoed through the cave. Dust rained from above. Daniel and Neliara spun around as shadows appeared at the entrance. A group of armored figures stepped inside, the ones who had been chasing them. One of them smirked. "We'll take that, Carter." Daniel exchanged a look with Neliara. They weren't leaving without a fight. And this time, they had the power to fight back. Daniel's fingers hovered over the artifact, its golden glow reflecting in his eyes. He could feel its energy pulsing. This was it, the key to everything. But before he could grab it, the enemy soldiers surrounded them. The leader, a tall man in dark armor, smirked. "We've been looking for that for a long time, Carter." Daniel clenched his fists. "Too bad. It's not for sale." The man chuckled. "Oh, we're not buying. We're taking." Without warning, he raised his weapon and fired. Daniel reacted instantly, grabbing the artifact and diving behind cover. The room exploded with gunfire. Neliara dodged behind a pillar, returning fire with her blaster. "We're trapped," she shouted. Daniel felt energy surging through his veins. The artifact in his hand hummed with power. He didn't understand how, but he could feel it guiding him. Then something ancient awakened. The Lost Fleet awakens. The symbols on the walls lit up. The vault trembled. A deep, rumbling voice echoed through the chamber. Key recognized. Initiating fleet activation. Daniel's heart pounded. He had done it. The enemy leader's smirk faded. "What have you done?" Suddenly, the ground split open. The ceiling cracked as massive structures rose from the ground. Hidden within the planet's crust, gigantic warships, sleek and powerful, began to emerge. Outside, the sky darkened as the Lost Fleet came to life. The enemy soldiers panicked. They had lost control. Neliara grabbed Daniel's arm. "We need to move. Now." The escape. Blaster fire erupted again as they ran. Daniel ducked behind a fallen pillar, firing back at the attackers. Neliara covered him, taking down 2 enemies with precise shots. "There's an exit through the tunnels. Follow me." Daniel sprinted after her, clutching the artifact tightly. The walls shook violently, chunks of stone collapsing around them. Behind them, the enemy leader roared, "Stop them!" But it was too late. The fleet was fully online. Outside, Massive ships hovered in formation, weapons glowing. The air hummed with energy. As Daniel and Neliara reached their ship, a deep voice echoed from the fleet's command systems. "Awaiting orders, Commander." Daniel froze. He knew that voice. It had been recorded for him. His father's voice. Neliara looked at him. "Daniel, this is your fleet." The realization hit him hard. Everything. The treaty, his lost memories, the artifact. It all led to this moment. Daniel clenched his fists. The enemy ships were already retreating, knowing they had lost. He stepped forward and spoke clearly. "All ships, prepare for war." The fleet roared to life. The battle for the future was just beginning. The enormous fleet hovered above Kairos 9, its warships gleaming in the red light of the dying sun. Daniel Carter stood on the bridge of the command ship, looking out at the vast ships now under his command. The weight of the moment pressed down on him. The lost fleet, a fleet his father had hidden away, a fleet that now belonged to him. Beside him, Neliara watched quietly. Her eyes, full of admiration and concern, stayed fixed on Daniel. "You did it," she said softly. "You've awakened them." Daniel's eyes remained on the fleet. "I didn't have much of a choice." He ran a hand through his hair, still trying to make sense of it all. He had never asked for this. But now, the responsibility was his. The voice of the fleet's commander came through the comms. "Commander Carter, awaiting your orders." Daniel swallowed. He had always been a trader, never a soldier or a leader. He had always kept a low profile, traveling between worlds. Now he was in control of an entire fleet of warships. Neliara stepped closer to him, her tone gentle. "What will you do now?" Daniel turned to her, his expression torn. "I don't know. Everything I've known about my life. It's all changed in a matter of days. I was just a regular guy. Now I'm the leader of a fleet." Neliara smiled softly. "You've always had the heart of a leader. Your instincts have guided you this far." Daniel met her gaze. Her belief in him meant more than he could explain. Still, the weight of the decision remained. "What if I'm not the right person for this?" he asked quietly. "I'm not a general. I don't know how to command an army." Neliara placed a hand on his arm. "The fleet recognizes you. It's more than just your bloodline. It's the promise you made long ago, the bond you share with it. This fleet was always meant to follow you." Daniel looked down at the artifact in his hand, still glowing with its strange power. He had promised to protect it, to restore it. Now he had to decide what to do with it. His mind flashed back to his father's words, words he had forgotten until now. "One day, you'll need to lead. You'll have to make hard choices, but you'll do what's right." He didn't want this responsibility. He didn't want to fight. But with enemies closing in and the future of two worlds at stake, he had no choice. Daniel took a deep breath. "I will lead," he said, his voice firm. "I'll do what's necessary, but not just for me. For all of us." Neliara's smile widened. "I knew you'd find your way." The AI commander's voice echoed again. "Commander Carter, the fleet is at your command." Awaiting orders. Daniel turned to face the bridge's view screen. The fleet was ready. The enemy ships that had followed them here would not get away, and he would make sure that the lost fleet would fight for a future worth protecting. He gripped the controls firmly. "Prepare for launch. We're going to take back what was lost." As the fleet prepared to leave Kairos 9, Daniel knew the journey ahead would be long and filled with danger, but it was his journey now, and he wasn't turning back. The hum of the lost fleet filled the air as the ships began to move in formation. Daniel Carter stood at the center of the bridge, his hand steady on the controls. The fleet's commander called out, its voice clear and authoritative. "Commander Carter, the fleet is ready for your orders. The enemy is within range." Daniel looked out at the vast fleet before him. An armada he never asked for, but now was his to command. Ships of all sizes, some sleek and fast, others massive and armed to the teeth, all waited for his decision. He felt the weight of the responsibility pressing down on him. The future of entire civilizations rested on his shoulders. Beside him, Niliara watched, her eyes filled with a mixture of hope and uncertainty. She had believed in him from the start, but now they were both facing the unknown. Daniel glanced at her, his thoughts momentarily drifting. "You were right," he said quietly. "I didn't want any of this, but it's the only choice we have." Niliara nodded, her voice steady. "Sometimes the right choice is the hardest one to make." Daniel didn't reply. Instead, he focused on the task at hand. The enemy fleet was close. The Zereth Dominion had followed them, desperate to reclaim what they had lost: the artifact, the fleet, and the power that came with it. This was it. "Prepare to engage," Daniel ordered. The fleet responded in unison, the ships powering up their weapons. A moment of silence passed as everyone waited for the first move. Then the enemy appeared. They were massive, their ships dark and menacing, but Daniel wasn't afraid. He wasn't just fighting for the fleet or for his people, he was fighting for a future. Niliara spoke softly beside him. "Remember, Daniel, the fleet doesn't just follow you because of bloodline. It follows you because of what you stand for. Your choices, your honor." He nodded, his mind clear now. This was his fight. "All ships, engage. Full power to forward shields," Daniel commanded. The battle began. The clash of titans. The first volley of fire from the enemy ships hit, but the lost fleet was ready. Shields flared to life, absorbing the impact. Daniel twisted the controls, dodging an incoming barrage, sending their ship into a sharp roll. Explosions erupted around them as the enemy fired again. "We need to break their formation, now," Daniel shouted. Niliara glanced at him, then at the screen. "I'll handle the left flank. You take the right." Without another word, they moved in sync. Daniel sent the fleet into a flurry of tactical maneuvers, using their speed and agility to outmaneuver the larger enemy ships. Explosions rippled through the void as enemy vessels were picked off one by one. The fight was intense, but the lost fleet's precision and teamwork won the day. The enemy's numbers began to dwindle as their ships fell one by one. Victory. It wasn't long before the last of the enemy ships retreated, leaving behind only the silence of space. Daniel let out a breath, his heart still racing. The lost fleet had won. They had taken back what was lost. Niliara stepped up beside him, her voice filled with relief. "You did it. We did it." Daniel nodded, still absorbing the weight of the victory. "It's not over yet, but it's a start." He turned to face the vast stars beyond, the future uncertain but full of possibility. He had made his choice. He had renewed the promise he had made long ago: to protect, to lead, and to fight for a future worth living. As the ships of the lost fleet began to regroup, Daniel knew one thing for sure: this was only the beginning, and he was ready for whatever came next.